By now, you've probably seen the clips. A snake too big to be real. A creature caught on a trail camera that looks like nothing on Earth. A blurry shape in the water that someone swears is a monster. Most of it is fake, or misidentified, or simply unverifiable. And if you've spent any time online, you already suspect that. But here is the part almost nobody talks about. The real Amazon doesn't need any of that. In the last 2 years alone, scientists have confirmed a brand new species of giant snake, one bigger than anything filmed for a viral video. Archaeologists have used lasers to find entire lost cities that explorers walked over for 20 years without seeing them. And right now, in territory the size of Portugal, there are human societies living who have never had sustained contact with the outside world. This is what actually happened when people went looking. Every discovery in this documentary is backed by a named scientist, a peer-reviewed publication, or a government agency, not an anonymous clip. If that is the kind of story you want, stay with us and consider subscribing, because we're about to go looking for what is real. We're going to start with the legend that started all of this. Then we'll find out what science actually found when it looked for the truth behind it. Long before smartphones, before YouTube, before anyone could fake a monster on camera, people who lived along the Amazon were already telling stories about one. They called it the Yakamama, mother of the water. A serpent said to stretch 30 to 60 meters, powerful enough to protect the forest itself. The story isn't a recent invention. It traces back to at least the 13th century, passed down for generations before a single European ever set foot on the river. No physical evidence has ever placed a serpent that size in the Amazon. But the story didn't need footage to survive. It survived because it was retold. Community to community, century after century. So the question isn't whether a 60-meter snake is swimming somewhere in Brazil. It almost certainly isn't. The real question is what actually inspired centuries of people to keep telling this story in the first place, and whether anything in the Amazon comes close to matching it. To answer that, we have to leave the water for a moment, because before scientists found anything swimming, they found something no one expected to still be standing. For most of the 20th century, the working assumption among archaeologists was simple. The Amazon rainforest could never have supported large, organized societies. The soil was too poor, the jungle too dense, the terrain too difficult. It was treated as wilderness, essentially untouched by large-scale human civilization. That assumption has fallen apart in the last few years, and it fell apart because of lasers. In Ecuador's Upano Valley, researchers had been walking the ground for over 2 decades. The lead archaeologist on the project, Stefan Rostein, had explored the site many times without realizing what he was standing on. Then, using LiDAR, a technology that fires laser pulses through gaps in the forest canopy and builds a 3D map of what is underneath, his team saw it. At least 15 separate settlements, connected by roads built to cross each other at precise right angles, spread across roughly 230 square miles, 6,000 platforms, plazas, and mounds. Published in the journal Science in January 2024, it is now considered the oldest and largest known urban network ever found in the Amazon, dating back roughly 2,000 years. Ecuador wasn't alone. In Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos, a separate team led by archaeologist Heiko P.R. Famers found something just as staggering using the same technology: monumental platforms, pyramid structures, and a water management system of canals and reservoirs built to handle seasonal flooding. It belonged to the Kasarabi culture, and it had been standing unnoticed for over 1,000 years. None of this happened by accident. Decades earlier, anthropologist Michael Heckenberger had spent 30 years documenting a fortified settlement called Cujicugu on Brazil's Upper Xingu River. Proof, long before LiDAR existed, that organized garden cities had once thrived here. What the lasers did was reveal the true scale of what he'd been describing all along. And the soil itself tells its own story. Across an area nearly twice the size of Ireland, researchers have mapped something called terra preta, Amazonian dark earth, artificially enriched over generations by the people who live there. turning naturally poor rainforest soil into some of the most fertile ground in the region. It is the reason dense populations could farm here at all. So what happened to them? In 1541, the Spanish explorer Francisco de Orellana became the first European to travel the length of the Amazon River, and he recorded active populous riverside settlements the entire way. Within a generation, most of it was gone. Disease introduced by that contact swept through the region faster than anyone could have stopped it. Some estimates place the pre-contact population of the Amazon basin as high as 5 million people. By the time later explorers arrived looking for the civilizations Orellana described, the forest had already reclaimed everything. That is the unsettling part. Statistical modeling now suggests there could be another 10 to 24,000 earthworks still hidden beneath the canopy, never surveyed, never confirmed. Most of what has been flagged by these models hasn't even been visited on the ground yet. It exists only as a pattern in the data, waiting for someone to walk out and check. It is worth sitting with how strange that is. For 100 years, explorers assumed that if a civilization had existed here, someone would have found it by now. Instead, the story turned out to be the opposite. The evidence was always there. What was missing was a way to see it. And once that technology existed, it didn't just confirm one lost city. It confirmed an entire pattern of urban life stretching across multiple countries, built by different cultures, centuries apart, all hidden by the same canopy. Which raises an obvious question: if entire cities could hide in plain sight for centuries, what else has the Amazon kept hidden? Not among the ruins, but among the living. In 2022, a research team led by Professor Brian Fry from the University of Queensland traveled into Ecuador's Biwawari-Warani territory. They weren't hunting for a new species. They were there filming a wildlife documentary, working alongside the Warani people to study anacondas and test them for environmental toxins. What they found changed the story entirely. The Warani led them on a 10-day expedition by canoe into a population of anacondas. They consider sacred snakes rumored to be the largest in existence. One specimen the team measured came in at 20.5 feet long and 440 pounds, impressive on its own. But when they ran genetic tests on the blood samples, the numbers didn't make sense at first. This snake wasn't just a large green anaconda. Its DNA differed from the known green anaconda population by 5.5%. To put that in perspective, humans and chimpanzees differ genetically by about 2%. This snake was more than twice as genetically distinct from its supposed relatives as we are from chimps, despite looking almost identical to the naked eye. Fry called it the highlight of his career. Published in the journal Diversity in February 2024, the finding confirmed something that hadn't happened since 2002, an entirely new species of giant anaconda, the northern green anaconda, Eunectes Yakamama, which split off from its southern relatives roughly 10 million years ago. It is now the largest snake species confirmed by science, not by legend, by genetics. And it isn't the only giant hiding beneath the Amazon surface. The Pyropheba, also called the Goliath catfish, is one of the largest freshwater fish on the planet, reliably documented up to 12 feet long and over 300 pounds with a verified rod and reel record of 341. It migrates thousands of kilometers between the Andes and the Amazon estuary, a journey scientists still don't fully understand. Brazilian folklore claims it can swallow a person whole. That part isn't true. But the fish behind the exaggeration is real, and it is enormous. What makes this discovery particularly striking is how long the anaconda had been hiding. Green anacondas are one of the most studied snakes in the world. Heavily documented, frequently filmed, familiar to anyone who has ever watched a wildlife program. And yet, an entire species inside that population went unrecognized until researchers finally ran the genetics on animals from this specific, remote stretch of Ecuadorian territory. It wasn't hiding because it was rare. It was hiding because no one had looked at its DNA before. So a documentary film crew, looking for footage of an animal everyone already knew about, ended up discovering one that science didn't. If that can still happen with something as large and well-studied as an anaconda, it raises a harder question about what else remains unclassified in the same river system, including the people who have lived alongside these animals for generations, and who almost no one outside the Amazon has ever actually met. Everything so far, the cities, the anaconda, the catfish, required someone to go looking. This next part doesn't. It is happening right now, whether anyone looks or not. Brazil's Indigenous Affairs Agency, FUNAI, currently has 115 uncontacted indigenous peoples registered within its borders. Only 29 of those are officially confirmed. The remaining 86 are still under formal analysis. A backlog large enough that anthropologists studying the issue call it serious. Globally, the organization Survival International counts 196 uncontacted peoples across the planet. Brazil by itself accounts for more of them than any other country on Earth. The single largest concentration sits in a territory called Vale do Javari, an area roughly the size of Portugal, home to at least 11 confirmed isolated groups, more than anywhere else in the country. This is an ancient history. Between January and April of 2024, FUNAI teams monitoring the Masako indigenous territory in Ronfania recorded something remarkable on trail cameras. 9 men from an uncontacted group, collecting axes and machetes, deliberately left for them along forest trails. It is a method FUNAI has used for years, leaving tools rather than approaching directly, a form of contact that isn't really contact at all. The same monitoring found temporary shelters, honey collection sites, and signs of hunting, evidence of a fully functioning, self-sufficient society operating entirely outside the world most of us live in. And it is still unfolding. In December 2024, Brazilian courts ordered legal protection for the Mamori Fé Grande territory, safeguarding nearly 260,000 hectares of land for an isolated group, first confirmed in 2021. Then, in 2025, a lone man from that same group became separated from his community and made first contact with the outside world, an event that happened within the time frame of the research behind this very documentary. Why doesn't Brazil simply go and find these groups, study them, introduce them to modern medicine and technology? Because history has already answered that question. Brutally, the disease that devastated Amazonian populations after Orellana's expedition in the 16th century is exactly what FUNAI's non-contact policy exists to prevent. Isolated groups have little to no immunity to outside illness. Contact, however well-intentioned, has historically been closer to catastrophe than to rescue. So instead, teams monitor from a distance, protect the land legally, and wait. Every other discovery in this documentary involves someone finding something, a team flying lasers over a canopy, a crew wading into a river with a camera. This is different. FUNAI's approach isn't about discovery at all. It is about restraint, deliberately not making contact, deliberately not mapping every group in full, deliberately leaving the mystery unresolved because resolving it has historically cost lives, in a documentary built around the idea that real evidence is more compelling than invented mystery. This is the one place where the mystery itself is the responsible choice. It is the most profound discovery in this entire documentary, and it isn't a discovery at all in the traditional sense. It is an acknowledgement that some of the last truly unmapped human societies on Earth are living exactly where the old legends said something extraordinary was hiding. Which brings us back to where we started. There is one legend we haven't resolved yet, and unlike the Yakamama serpent, this one was actually tested. In the Tapajós River Basin, indigenous communities have long described a creature they call the Mapinguari, large, thickly furred, foul-smelling, with powerful claws. Starting in 1993, a Goldie Museum ornithologist named David Oren decided to take that description seriously, not as internet folklore, but as a scientific hypothesis. He spent years in the field collecting witness testimony, hair samples, and footprint casts. His theory was specific. Oren proposed that the Mapinguari might be a cultural memory of Megatherium, a genus of giant ground sloths that once stood up to 20 feet long, covered in thick reddish fur, capable of rearing up on their hind legs. These animals went extinct roughly 10,000 years ago, right around the time humans first arrived in the Americas. The physical details lined up with unsettling precision. The sloth's unusual gait, caused by walking on the sides of their feet, could easily be mistaken for backward-facing footprints. Their layered bone armor could explain old accounts describing the creature as nearly impossible to kill for years. That was as far as the evidence went. Consistent, detailed testimony from people across different communities, all describing the same creature in similar terms. Then came the test. When Oren's team finally analyzed the hair samples they'd collected, none of them belonged to an unknown animal. They matched giant anteaters and modern sloths, species already known to science. That is not a cover-up, and it is not a disappointing ending. It is an honest result. A real scientist ran a real test on a real legend, and the evidence didn't support a living creature. What it did support is something almost as remarkable, an oral tradition passed down across generations with no photographs and no written records that preserved physical details closely matching an animal that vanished from the Amazon 10,000 years before anyone had a camera to prove it. That is the answer to the question this documentary opened with. The Amazon's monsters, when you actually go looking for them the way science is supposed to, with testable evidence, named researchers, and honest results, tend to dissolve into something else. Sometimes that something else is a misidentified sloth. Sometimes it is an entirely new species of the largest snake alive. Either way, it is real. So what actually lives in the Amazon? Once you strip away the viral clips and the anonymous footage, lost cities large enough to have housed tens of thousands of people hidden under canopy for centuries, a genuinely new species of giant snake confirmed by genetics rather than legend, and human societies, alive today, who have chosen, or been protected into, a life the rest of the world has never touched. None of it needed to be exaggerated. If anything, the honest version is harder to look away from than the fake one, because every part of it can be traced back to a name, a publication, a government record. But almost everything in this documentary shares one quiet warning underneath it. The forest that hid these cities, this snake, and these societies for centuries is disappearing faster than researchers can study it. Whatever else is still out there, undiscovered, may not stay hidden long enough to be found the right way. If you want to keep following stories like this, real evidence, real researchers, no invented monsters, subscribe, because there is more of the Amazon and the rest of the world still waiting to be verified. The serpent that started this story was never real. What we found instead was